Welcome to European Journeys. We are on the sixth stage of a journey that leads us in the footsteps of the Apostle Paul in Italy. In our last stage, stage 5 that is, we were in Borgo Faiti, along the Via Appia Antica, which is today the Strada Statale 7, the State Road 7, and we were discovering one of the few remnants of an ancient relay for travelers called Forum of Appius. Well, from Borgo Faiti, to reach the location of this stage is pretty straightforward, even literally, because the place we're visiting is just 20 kilometers away from Borgo Faiti towards the north, along the same road, the Statale 7, and, as it is the case with ancient Roman roads, the route is a straight line. There is absolutely no turns. And so here in the flatlands preceding the town of Cisterna di Latina, on the right-hand side of the road, lies an archaeological site of Roman ruins. Well, this site was in fact another relay for travelers, and this one was called Tres Tabernae, which simply means 3 taverns. Well, archaeological research at Tres Tabernae began only at the end of the 20th century, so it's fairly recent. And yet, ancient writings reveal that several famous ancients came to rest here as they journeyed along the Via Appia. Well, one of them was the famous Roman senator and scholar named Cicero. It was indeed from this relay that he wrote and sent some of his letters to his friend Atticus in the mid-1st century BC, so a few decades before the birth of Jesus Christ. In the Bible, we also read in Luke's records of the Acts of the Apostles that the Apostle Paul traveled through Tres Tabernae as a prisoner on his way to Rome. Well, here is what Luke wrote, and I quote, "And so we came to Rome. The brothers and sisters there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. At the sight of these people, Paul thanked God and was encouraged." End quote. Well, to this day, no archaeological evidence of the passage of Paul in this site has been found. Well, this could be expected since the works began fairly recently indeed. But what if nothing would ever be found here? Could this be a hint that Luke's records are not trustworthy? Could this feed the belief that the book of Acts is a forgery written later in history in order to bring false evidence in favor of Christianity? Or generally speaking, has there been archaeological research done elsewhere that has confirmed or disconfirmed the facts reported in the book of Acts? Well, such questions are relevant today because in the 19th century, skepticism towards the reliability of the Bible began to grow as what was then called the historical critical method of interpretation of the Bible began to grow in our theological institutions. Where this current has led skepticism to be the prevalent position towards the Bible in Europe today. And yet, at the same time, in the 19th century, other scholars arose to prove that actually it was really skepticism itself that was fallacious and not the Bible. And so one of the world's leading archaeologists at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th was a Scotsman named Sir William Ramsey. He studied in Aberdeen in Scotland, Oxford in England, and also in Tubingen in Germany. And in this latter university, he became acquainted with what was called the Tubingen School of Thought. The Tubingen School of Thought. Here he studied the writings of famous theologians of the 19th century from Germany, people such as Ferdinand Christian Bauer or Julius Wellhausen, people who were well-known advocates indeed of the historical critical method of interpretation of the Bible. Well, Ramsey was initially seduced by the Tubingen School of Thought. But he was not a theologian, he was an archaeologist, as I said. And later on, Ramsey traveled to Asia Minor, in modern-day Turkey, to do archaeological research. Well, he didn't go there for the sake of the Bible, but interestingly enough, Asia Minor is a region about which Luke reports several facts related to Paul's journeys in the book of Acts. So, Did Ramsey's research confirm the ideas developed by the Tubingen school of thought? Well, not really. And here is what Ramsey wrote, and I quote, "I am fairly claimed to have entered on this investigation without any prejudice in favor of the conclusion which I shall now attempt to justify to the reader. On the contrary, I began with a mind unfavorable to it, for the ingenuity and apparent completeness of the Tubingen theory had at one time quite convinced me. It did not lie then in my line of life to investigate the subject minutely, but more recently I found myself often brought in contact with the Book of Acts as an authority for the topography, antiquities, and society of Asia Minor." End quote. So you hear what he's talking about here. He saw that the Book of Acts was actually an authority for the topography, antiquities, and society of Asia Minor. Well, this quote comes from his book St. Paul the Traveler and the Roman Citizen. And in this book, Ramsey shows how all the theories that had been raised against the trustworthiness of the Book of Acts were ill-founded. One such theory was the idea that the Book of Acts was a 2nd century composition. But the attempts to bring proofs supporting the theory revealed, according to Ramsey, an astonishing, and I quote, misapprehension of the real character of ancient life and Roman history, end quote. Well, such theory could therefore not survive except for, and again I quote, popular magazines and novels for the semi-religious orders, end quote. So this is quite telling. Another theory claimed that Luke, or another author actually, pretending to be Luke, would have composed the Book of Acts from scraps of other manuscripts, but here again the attempts to prove this theory brought him to the conclusion of discarding it. Well, not only Ramsey found out that the theories trying to discredit the Book of Acts were ill-founded, but his research brought him to the startling conclusion that the author of the Book of Acts, whom he understood to be Luke, was, and I quote, among the historians of the first rank, end quote. But what does he mean by the highest rank? Well, I quote, "A historical work of the highest order, in which a writer commands excellent means of knowledge either through personal acquaintance or through access to original authorities, and brings to the treatment of his subject genius, literary skill, and sympathetic historical insight into human character and the movement of events," end quote. In another book called Luke the Physician, Ramsey confirmed that, and I quote again, "Luke reproduces the facts accurately, that he, to a certain degree, changes the words in the interest of literary style, but that even these verbal changes are generally confined to single words or short phrases," end quote. So you hear what he says here. Ramsey is pretty convinced that Luke was in fact one of the most reliable historians of his time. Well, Ramsey's research has not only countered the attacks against the reliability of the Book of Acts, but it also confirms the reliability of the Gospel of Luke as well. And in that Gospel, it is reported that Jesus died and rose again, and that is reported as a historical fact. Well, even though the archaeological research at Tres Tabernae began many decades after the death of Ramsey, we should not be surprised if in the future some discoveries would bring further evidence against the theories which had attempted to discard the Book of Acts, and so the Bible as a whole. I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next week for another stage of European Journeys.